Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and those who don't identify as either, you are listening to Ratchet and Respectable. We're doing something a little different this week. If you've been following the podcast for a while, you'll remember that during COVID, I was living in LA and I moved back home to be with my parents in the suburbs, more space, more safety, sort of. And while I was there, my dad allowed me to interview him. It has been almost 5 years since that interview happened. I have asked him multiple times. The answer is, he don't really have nothing to add, nothing to share at this time. But, ask me again. Who knows? This time, I called him. I told him I'd gone to the movies. I'd gone to see the same movie, Sinners, twice in the same weekend. I love this film. The movie is set in Mississippi in the 1930s. My dad was born in Mississippi in the 1940s. A lot of settings in the film are places my dad would be familiar with. A lot of themes in the film would be something that he was familiar with. I was talking to him about the film and I was just asking him random questions about just wanting more context. You know how I am. When I like something, I have to know everything about it. I've been all over the internet reading hot takes on threads and, people discussing the minutia of the film. I'm not the only one that's obsessed with this film. I'll probably go see it twice more, just like I did with Black Panther. That said, I'm on the phone with my dad. We're talking about various themes that come up in the film. And I just asked him, would you let me interview you just to talk about the film and give context for Mississippi around that time? And I didn't really expect him to say yes. I ask him all the time if he wants to come on the podcast. And then he was like, sure, I'll do it. When do you want to do it? And I was like, the podcast drops every Wednesday. So can you do it today, Monday? So he was like, yeah, sure. I was like, oh. So a couple things about my dad. My dad doesn't guest. My dad doesn't feature. And my dad doesn't anchor. He is the main attraction, and that's it. If you've listened to the podcast, you've listened to me talk about my dad, this doesn't surprise you. I'm not doing pop culture commentary or recaps or any of that this week. For a proper review, spoiler, I'm in love with the movie, of Sinners, we're going to have to wait till next week. Also, to talk about Jalen Hurts on the cover of Men's Health and what appears to be a wedding ring. I was like, did I miss the wedding? I knew he was engaged. I didn't know a wedding had taken place. The writer of the article is Clover Hope. The Beyonce covers for Vogue, it's always an as told to Clover Hope. I'm about to call Clover and be like, girl, what's happening on this ring finger? My nosy ass wants to know what nephew's been up to. He's a baby. I can't even have lust in my heart for him. I don't touch under 40 and I don't look with lust under 30. Just a personal preference. My father also cannot be associated with any ratchetness, so we definitely can't be covering this new lawsuit against Shannon Sharpe. A woman accuses him of all sorts of depraved sexual behavior, to which he responded, or his lawyer responded, and which Shannon Sharpe posted on his page. Quotes from the text messages that the woman sent to him, just filth, racist filth. I was like, Unc, you letting the lady talk to you like that? I mean, the filth, fine, but the racist filth. And I was like, is this what you into? Where's your, not young, but where's your gifted in blackness? Where's your self-esteem? Believe in yourself right from the start. I guess the important part is I hope you didn't do what the woman accused you of. We will get to this next Wednesday. In the meantime, meet a man who needs no introduction. Y'all hear about my dad all the time. So meet my dad again. Or if you're new, for the first time. Hi, Dad.
Hello, Demetria. How you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well.
You have a perfect radio voice,
Well, Demetria, I think I earned that.
You did radio for years.
I did.
What was your name on the radio?
Bill Lucas.
Bill? Who the hell is Bill?
That's William.
I ain't never heard nobody call you Bill.
Well, me either, because when I worked at the Census Bureau in Detroit, my census name was my real name and my radio name was Bill.
Did the people at the census know you had a side job on the radio?
They did.
Did they care?
I guess they didn't. They didn't say anything. Some of the people listened to it.
Oh.
Because I was doing jazz in Detroit. So, most of the white folks, they didn't really care about jazz. Some of them did now. But most of my people at the Census Bureau, they didn't care about jazz.
Where did Luke the Lover come from?
That was when I was working in Jackson, Mississippi. My name was Bill Lucas, but I was Luke the Lover, the Stone Street Strutter.
Sir, where did you get the name Luke the Lover from?
That was part of my intro.
What was your full intro?
This is Mrs. Lucas's little baby boy, 152 pounds of most precious pride and joy, sitting twixt and between these three turntables facing this booming microphone of WOKJ, socking this musical power to you hour after hour. When I walk down the street, all the little girls' hearts fluttered. They turn around and say, "Hey, there goes my man Luke the Lover, the Stone Street Strutter."
You are not the person who raised me. Who are you?
I'm your dad. That's all I can say.
You've lived many lives, I think.
I did.
You did. We started talking about Jackson, Mississippi, but the origin story is Collins, Mississippi.
That's where I grew up, yes.
In 1940s, Emmett Till had a huge impact on your life. You mention him all the time.
We were both 14 years old, and I was very interested in what had happened to him. We got the black papers, like the Jackson Advocate. That was a weekly paper. They carried stories. Then the Ebony Jet carried stories. And word of mouth, you get a lot of the information.
Why did Emmett Till's story have such an impact on you specifically?
I was 14. He was 14. And the way he was killed, and coming from Chicago to visit, we had people coming from Chicago or coming from Akron or coming from Cleveland to visit. And it was like a different life for him.
Was what happened to him common?
I can't say common, but not publicized as much as his was. And it was the reason it was publicized because of some of the people that worked for Johnson Publishing Company. They got involved in it. The sheriff and the people in Mississippi didn't want that body out of Mississippi.
Why not?
Well, they just wanted to say, cover it up, leave it in Mississippi. But somehow they got the body at the funeral home director to take the body from Money, Mississippi, or as close to Money, Mississippi, wherever it was, over to another part of the state where the city of New Orleans train came through, and they put the body on the train without them knowing it and sent it to Chicago.
They snuck the body out of Mississippi?
They snuck the body out of Mississippi, yes.
Okay. I never heard that. I literally went to the Blackstonian like 2 weeks ago, and that's not a detail that's in the museum. How far is Money, Mississippi, where he was murdered? How far is that from Collins, where you grew up?
I would say in the area of 200 miles.
That's like New York to D.C. Far, but not far, like super far. Did you know stories of things that had happened like that to other people in Mississippi?
I knew that there was a lot of lynching.
Who got lynched?
Well, there was one guy, his name was Willie McGee, and he was lynched in Laurel, Mississippi, and they advertised that they were going to do the lynching over the radio, what time, and we actually listened to it.
Pause. They talked about the lynching before it happened on the radio, like, hey, we about to do a lynching?
Yeah, they talked about it when it was going to be, where it was, and what time it was going to be. It was going to be in Laurel. A lot of people came as like they were coming to a sporting event, and they announced the lynching as if they were at a sporting event.
And you listened to this?
Everybody that was in the house was listening to it because that's just what it was.
Was this common that you would listen to a lynching on the radio?
No.
What was he accused of doing? Do you remember?
He was accused of raping a white lady.
You remember listening to it, but do you remember having like any opinion on hearing somebody being lynched as a kid?
I heard it, never forgot it. When you go to the Black Museum in Jackson, Mississippi,
yeah,
they have these pillars, and they have the names starting with whatever year. And each of the pillars, they have the name of the person that was lynched. They have the date it was lynched, and the county it was in, and what the person was lynched for.
Did you see this person's name when you went to the museum, Willie McGee?
I sure did. And that was one of the first things that I looked for when I walked in the door and I saw those pillars.
To see if he was acknowledged.
Yeah.
Was that the only person that you knew that was lynched?
That was a classmate. Yeah, he was a classmate because we all went there in 58. And he went home for Thanksgiving. It was either Thanksgiving or Christmas, I'm sorry. And he never came back. And when they found him in one of the rivers that was closest to Poplarville, Mississippi.
You say these things like it's like very matter of fact. Like you tell me stories with the same inflections of telling me that, it's raining outside.
Had a lot of time to talk about it, and had a lot of time to think about it.
You do realize that what you're saying for someone who didn't live it sounds crazy.
That's just what it is.
And we were in Mississippi together. We were driving to your parents' house, just driving along this 2-lane street, and you pointed out like, oh, that's where so-and-so, they found him hanging.
This was really close to the house. There was a little U road that went from the main road around the house back to the main road. Well, at the end, there was a big oak tree. And I was told that there was a person who had done something, who had ran through the yard of the back of the house and went in the woods, and the white folks came and found him, and they brought him back, and they killed him out there by that big oak tree. And see, at that big oak tree, that's where, when we were picking cucumbers and stuff like that, that's where we would put our sacks, right out there by that big oak tree. But when I was coming home at night by myself, I always made sure that I walked as further away from that big oak tree as I could to the right. And then when I get to a certain point, I would make a short left, and I would be running most of the time if I wasn't with somebody. And then sometimes I would think that tree looked a little lighter. I had a light around it sometimes. Maybe it was just me. I don't think so. Then I would run a little faster.
Mm-hmm. Somebody being lynched, you talk about it as if it was a very common thing. Was it common?
I wouldn't say common, but then too, growing up in Mississippi and growing up and people living in Detroit and Cleveland and Chicago, it's kind of like all the same thing, because there's always been some shooting on Friday nights and Saturday nights, especially, and maybe across the week. But, it was something that was talked about, and you go to the funerals and you go into the next one.
One of the reasons that I wanted to speak with you specifically about like your life and growing up in Mississippi and such is there's a big film right now. I know we've talked about it, but you haven't had a chance to see it yet, called Sinners. And it is based in Mississippi Delta in the 1930s. A lot of things that you have shared with me over the years about your life come up in the film. I know you didn't grow up in the Delta. Working in the cotton fields, the blues, or lynching, or juke joints, those are all things that come up. And obviously, I don't have a reference for those, but I wanted to speak to you specifically about this time period because you have context for it that I will never have. One of the things that comes up in the movie is two brothers who have lived in Chicago, and they're returning to Mississippi, and they're hanging out with their young cousin, who's probably like in his late teens or so. And the young cousin is very interested in life in Chicago. And he says, I hear things are better for Black people in Chicago. And the cousin responds, and he's something like, Chicago ain't nothing but Mississippi with tall buildings. And do you think that's accurate?
I had two roommates who was from Corinth, Mississippi, which was in the northern part of Mississippi. And they would always tease me and said, they were better than me because they were closer to Chicago. Basically what they were saying, the further you were north in Mississippi, you were better than the people in the southern part of Mississippi on the way down to the southern part of Mississippi. And I heard that for so long until I always told this guy, man, shut up. Mississippi is Mississippi. Because they did the same thing in South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, New York, L.A. In fact, I had a roommate when I was in the military, and he came over and he was working in the banning area, and he was from Mississippi. But when he got out of high school, a lot of his cousins and his brothers and sisters, they all lived in Chicago. So he went to Chicago, and he says he stayed 2 weeks. And the only reason that he stayed 2 weeks is because he couldn't get out of there any quicker to get back home. Because he said that was the worst place he'd ever been in his life. It depends on who you're talking to, and just like I had cousins.
Who are your first cousins? Because most of the time when I hear you talk about your older siblings who were like 15, 20 years older than you.
Well, I had one group of first cousins. There was 9 of them that lived too far from us. All 9 of those first cousins, they all went to Jackson State and finished.
Oh.
And most of their kids and grandkids went to Jackson State.
Why didn't you let me go to Jackson State?
You ain't want to go to Jackson State.
You wouldn't let me go to HBCU at all. You wouldn't let me go to Howard or Spelman.
You went to Howard, you just wasn't enrolled.
Jessica and Marcy went to Howard. That's why I was always at Howard.
Like I said, you went to Howard, but you were not enrolled. You just went over there with your friends. Because a lot of people that you see now, they go to, oh, did your daughter go to Howard? I said, nope, she went to the University of Maryland.
There were people who went to Howard at that time who think I went to Howard because I was always there.
Yeah.
Went to classes and everything. Whole nother story. One of the themes of the movie is about cousins, and they had probably like the worst night ever. Like it was started off as a good time. They end up going to a juke joint, and then things just go horribly wrong from there. What was like the craziest night with you hanging out with your big cousins?
Oh, well, we all went to the juke joints.
You went to the juke joints, Daddy?
Oh, yes, indeed, I went to the juke joints.
How old were you at the juke joints?
Well, I finished high school at 16, so I must have been 14 or 15. My older people, buddies and things, they went to the juke joint, so I went to the juke joint.
If I had tried to go to the club at 14 and 15, that would be an absolute no. And I also graduated high school at 16.
Yeah, but it was totally different because the juke joints was the only place you could go. That's where they had the music, and you could dance, and you could shoot pool, and if the place was big enough, and then you could go. They might have 2 in some cities because they had 2 in Collins, the little city. So you could go from one to the other. Most of the time you couldn't get in. It was so crowded, especially on Friday nights and Saturday nights. But that was a hangout night. And then the one juke joint in Collins, they had the best bologna sandwiches that you could ever get. In fact, I miss those bologna sandwiches.
I'm not talking to you about bologna sandwiches at the juke joint when you was like 15 years old. That's ridiculous. Not the way you had a clamp down on me, just basically breathing outdoors. Like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Okay, so you make it from Collins, you go to Jackson State. I'm interested in how you ended up in Detroit. Actually, you know what? Let me back up 1 second. You also were in New Orleans. Is that before the service, after the service?
Oh, that was before the service. In fact, that was after my freshman year at Jackson State, after I had flunked out of school.
Oh, now you want to tell the story about flunking out, because I didn't hear nothing about that until after I graduated.
Well, you didn't need to know that because you might ask me to see my...
I might have tried to live your life?
Yeah.
Do as you do, not as you say?
Yeah. Oh, well, let's move on to another subject.
Talk about New Orleans. What was life like in New Orleans?
It was a great life for me.
What did you do?
Because I went to live, my dad called my brother, told him what had happened, and asked him if I could come and stay in New Orleans with him for a year. He said, yeah. And he owned a bar and luncheonette. And it was a well-known place. And we had good customers. And I learned a lot. So I learned how to run the business. And was in the city. And there were a lot of things happening in New Orleans.
Like what?
They had many, many clubs. The area right where my brother was, they must have had about 20 clubs within a 4 or 5 block radius. So you could just walk out of one to the other. And that was just fantastic. And they always had jukeboxes in them and, the latest music. And New Orleans always had its own dance, which I kind of never learned, but I thought I was a pretty good dancer. And I had some cousins there I would hang out with for a little bit. But then they had Xavier and they had Dillard. And, you would kind of hang around the campuses of Dillard and Xavier because they had some little beautiful chicks that you were kind of interested in.
The ladies? You was hanging out with the ladies, Daddy?
They just said they had some beautiful, we would call them little chicks that we were hanging out with.
You ain't talking about no chickens. You talking about ladies. I'm not asking you no further details.
Want me to say yes? Yes.
Yes, okay.
Well, sometimes they had football. In fact, both of them had football and basketball. And I used to go to some of the games because some of the coaches from Dillon and Xavier used to come to my brother's place for drinks and for food. And they would invite me and I would go.
So you had a hookup.
Well, I've always tried to have a hookup just about everywhere I've gone.
I picked that up from you. Okay. When you were in New Orleans, do you ever remember anyone practicing different spiritual practices? Like, I know that you were raised Christian, but do you remember anyone doing like voodoo or hoodoo or anything different than Christianity?
I heard of when I was in New Orleans about the voodoo and all of that. Never saw any people practice on it. But one of the things that they used to tell you, if you were going to somebody's house or something or meeting somebody, is to make sure they don't put any voodoo on you before you leave. That's about as much as I do.
I didn't know how common it was.
Oh, it was pretty common for people to talk about.
So when did you end up moving to Detroit?
After I got out of the military, I'd gone back to Jackson State because my brother told me when I went down there that he was going to let me stay 1 year, not 1 year and 1 day. And he said after that, I was going to either be going back to Jackson State, going to school, or either be going back to the country. So I chose to go back to Jackson State. And I went back to Jackson State. I needed 3 courses in student teaching, but I left because Jackson State didn't have anything to offer me. And when I say anything to offer me, I always wanted to be involved in communications and radio. And I would have done very well if I had gone to a place where they offered those courses. And the business part of it. They didn't have a business program at Jackson State. It was basically a teacher's college. So when I came home after my 3rd year, I stayed for a few days, and I got a call to the Army, and I volunteered to the Air Force the next day. And then I went in the Air Force and stayed almost 4 years. 3 years, 11 months, and 12 days, I think is what it was.
That was for Vietnam?
The war was going on, but I didn't go to Vietnam. I went to Texas. After I left basic training, went to Wichita Falls, Texas, and I was in personnel. But the only reason that I got in personnel, instead of taking agriculture, my senior year in high school, I took typing. So because I was typing, I went to Wichita Falls instead of going to Vietnam. But had not I done that, Vietnam, here I come.
If you were raised on a farm, why did you choose to do typing instead of agriculture?
My aunts, my daddy's sisters, they had bought an old typewriter. And I was going to learn how to type on that typewriter. And then my dad would do like the taxes and the farm taxes and everything. And after he had accident, he couldn't write anything. So I used the old typewriter and some carbon paper, and I would sit there and fill out these applications. That was my first ways of typing. And then once I could take a typing course in high school, I took the typing course, and I typed most of my papers, and I did very well. In fact, when I was in the military, I got to where I could type like 90 words a minute without making a mistake.
Do you ever think about how things align in your life? Your aunts leave this typewriter behind. Your dad needs help. And so you learn to type. And so you decide to take typing instead of agriculture. And that keeps you from going to the front lines of Vietnam.
I knew I didn't want to be a farmer. And I had enough of that when I was working on the farm, a little farm in Collins. So I knew that was what I didn't want to do.
Before we talk about Detroit, can we talk about life on the farm? How much did you pick cotton for?
$2 100 pounds. I could pick a little more than 100 pounds, but most of the time I didn't get a chance to pick the whole day because if I had to go to school, one thing that my dad and my mama, it was education. Now, if you wanted to get in serious trouble, you miss school and not have a good reason. Because my dad would give you a good reason to not want to miss it again.
Okay, I read between the lines.
On the little farm that we had, we had a little cotton, but not that much. But there's always something. When you get a little farm or something like that, there's always something to do. Always.
What did you hate doing?
Picking cucumbers. Well, they get all kind of like mush and stuff on your hands, and then once it got hard, it was hard to get off. So you had to use gasoline to wash your hands and to get all of that mush.
Gasoline?
Yeah, if you use gasoline with all of that stuff you had on your hand from the cucumbers, you would it would come off. So then you'd have to get some soap and water, and then you would have to get something, And back in that day, people make their own soap. And don't ask me how they made the soap.
I don't know how to make it.
A lot of the soap was made because, like dead horses and dead cows and stuff, they would come and pick them up, and they would take them and they would make soap out of them.
Soap out of the dead animals?
Yeah.
I think you told me that your grandfather, he's born into slavery. Obviously, the Civil War happened. Slavery, except for Texas, ends in 1865. And your grandfather at some point got 40 acres, but maybe or maybe not a mule.
He had more than 40 acres.
Where's Nigger Ridge?
Because when he died, he gave each one of his children like 64 acres in Nigger Ridge. Nigger Ridge is outside of Collins, Mississippi, but it's a little place on a ridge.
What was the actual name of the place?
The name of the place was Collins, and the little community was Hopewell. But most of the people said we live on the ridge. But a lot of the people said, "Oh no, you don't live. You live out there by Nigger Ridge." So I wouldn't talk about Nigger Ridge for a long, long time. And then I figured that's a part of my history.
My thought process is you're pretty much surrounded by all Black people.
Yeah, the community that we lived in, which was Hopewell and Nigger Ridge, most of the people in that area, all the people in that area that we lived in, they own their own farms. A lot of them are kind of large farms, like maybe 100 acres or 200 acres or something like that. But then there was some small farms. Most of them had the small farms. And that's pretty much what they lived on.
And your dad, you told me earlier, like you never worked like white folks' land.
No, it didn't. He wouldn't let that happen because he was trying to do like a lot of parents did back in the day, is to hide the kids away from a lot of things that they could have been exposed to, which would have been that nice.
One of those things was the movies. You don't go to the movies like that to this day. Like I've been to the movies with you that I can recall like once in my lifetime, maybe twice. I think we went to see Black Panther. But before that, the only time you'd ever asked to go to the movies was you wanted to see the little guy. You wanted to see Kevin Hart and Ride Along.
Yeah, I did. And then I went to see what was the lady's name, when Stella got her groove?
You went to see Stella Got Her Groove Back?
Yeah.
Movies when you were growing up was segregated,
Absolutely.
Yes?
The white folks, they sat downstairs, and the Black folks, they went to a window, and they went upstairs, and they sat upstairs. Because of that, my dad always said he don't want us going to the movies. But I would slip and go sometimes. But usually when I would slip and go, they would know about it because somebody would tell somebody I saw you at the movie, so then it'd end up back. He wouldn't say anything, but I knew it was in the back of his mind. But then after I really realized, after I had grown up and really realized, what he was doing and what he was trying to do, I concurred.
When did you realize that you were Black and treated different?
I tell you, a couple of experiences, but this one was when after my dad had his accident, and we used to go to the doctor all the time. So we would always have to go in the back door. And the steps were not the regular steps. The steps were old steps. They were tilted and they were high. And it was tough sometimes getting him out of the car and getting him up the steps so we could get to the doctor's office. And you would go in, the room, and then you would see further that there was the white waiting room. So once we went to the dock, and Mr. Purvis was the driver that would usually take my dad to the doctor's office or to the hospital, whatever we had to do. And they told him, said, drive around front. Okay. So we drove around front. I got out, opened the door. We got him out of the car. He went up the steps, and I opened the front door. He went in the front door. He didn't say nothing. I didn't say nothing. He went in the front door. We walked right through the white waiting room, and we walked down the hall, and there was an empty office room. So he went in there, and he sat down. And when Dr. Crenshaw came in, he always called him W.A. He said, W.A., how you doing today? We thought he was going to say something about him coming in the front door. He didn't say one thing. He did what he had to do, examined him. We got up. We went out through the white waiting room. And from then on, we always went through the front door. And that was big because we were the only ones that I can remember that went through the front door. Only black folks that I can remember going through the front door. And also, once when going to Christmas, there was a Santa Claus on one side of the street. So my mom and these 3 little black kids coming down and happy, jumping up down to see Santa Claus. When we got close to him, he got up and walked across the other side of the street. And that was depressing.
Was it weird having a mom and a sister who were very, 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 very light? I think black folks knew they were black, but white folks might not always know they were black.
But I had a mom and 2 sisters because my little sister, who was 2 years younger than me, that died when she was 8. She was lighter than my mom and my sister.
Seen pictures of Pat. She looked brown.
No, she was light skinned.
Okay. I remember you saying somebody came to the house and thought your sister was like, they had a white woman in there cleaning?
Yeah, that was one of the school bus drivers because we lived not too far from the school. So he came up and knocked on the door, and my sister was there, and she was kept cleaning up the house. And the guy went back over and told the other bus drivers, he said, Miss Lucas had a white lady in there cleaning her house.
She ain't that light. I mean, she is light.
She was working, and she worked in a place in Philadelphia, Mississippi, where those three kids were killed during the civil rights movement. They thought she was white.
Did she ever pass?
And she wasn't passing. They didn't ask nothing, but she just did her job, and my sister was like the rest of the clothes. So
yeah.
She was always together.
But I'm asking, was it weird for people to keep thinking that your mother and your sister were white?
I didn't see it as weird. Hell, I was the darkest thing in the household. So sometimes, my mom would always tell me that she might have got the wrong baby. And I told her, you couldn't get the wrong baby because I was born at home.
Did you know when you were growing up under segregation, did you know how bad it was?
As each year went by, yes.
What did you hate the most?
That I didn't have the same opportunity. And then today's the same thing. Them that get. And, because the books that we used to get were the books that the white kids had. A lot of times they knew that they were coming to the black schools. They tear the pages out of them. So, or either they would write stuff in the back of them. And either when in the back, you would write your name as to who had the book last year and all of that. But that was one of the hard parts, that you couldn't get new books to study.
How'd you end up in Detroit?
When I got out of service, I stayed in Collins for a few extra weeks. And my dad went to the hospital, and I stayed until he passed. And my sister came down from Detroit, and she told me that I should come and spend some time with them, she and her husband. And I did. I flew to Detroit. I wasn't like a lot of the people. I didn't catch the bus. I didn't hook a ride with somebody else. I actually flew in.
That's some fancy nigga shit, just so you know.
I stayed with her for a while. She was a business lady. She ran the black bank in Detroit. And I had a brother that was he was well known in Detroit. I got a job in Detroit, and I stayed. But the first job I had was working like for Chrysler, and I think I worked with them about 13 days, and I quit because that was something I didn't want to do.
You couldn't work the factory, Daddy.
No, but the white guy that I was working for, he asked me one day, he said, "What time do you get into work?" And I said, 6:30. And he said, "Why don't you come in at 6 o'clock? Because the other people that come in, they won't know what time you came in." And he said, "And you go find yourself another job." He said, "Because you have more to offer than what this job is going to offer you." So I left and went to the Michigan Employment Security Commission. And I got there around noon, and I talked to a guy named Mr. Duncans, who was over the Detroit office for Michigan Employment Security Commission. And they sent me over to the Census Bureau. And they said, "You're going to send you over to this guy named Mr. Yerke. And if he talks to you less than a couple of hours, that means he's not interested." So I went in, Mr. Yerke, and I started the conversation. So he got from behind his desk, and we sat on the couch. And about 5:30, he says, "Oh, you want to go and get a beer and a burger?" And I said, "Absolutely." So I just got out of the military not too long before that, in August, and that was in probably October. I had a high tolerance of liquor being in the military because we did our share of sipping. So we went over and we had a few drinks. And when I left Mr. Yerke about 10 o'clock, he was drunk as hell.
That you got the job.
I got the job. But you know, I like people. I talk to people, and I can usually rap with the best.
You also had like an interesting friend circle in Detroit. I sometimes refer to you when I'm talking to my friends, and I'm like, "Yo, my dad is like Forrest Gump." Like, you just sort of always end up at the right places at the right time with very interesting people.
Yeah.
I think I was watching, like the Aretha Franklin movie. My friend was playing a role as Aretha Franklin's sister in one of the movies. And you were like, "Yeah, I knew her sister. She threw like parties on the weekend."
Carolyn, she lived next door.
Oh, God. What were Carolyn's parties like?
They were great.
I love how you're giving no details. That's wonderful. Okay. One of your other neighbors, if I recall, was Marvin Gaye a neighbor, or he lived in the neighborhood?
He lived in Northwest, up Northwest, but he was a good friend of my roommate who went to Jackson State, and he was a football player, and he tried out for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he didn't make the team, so he came and I met him, and he stayed there for a while, which was really good for me. And he, Marvin, and a couple of the football players, and some of the other entertainers like Smokey Robinson and this one of other Smokey's guys, they would all come by my place and they would go and play golf. They'd come back and maybe have a drink and they would all be gone. Never stayed that long. So that's how I met a lot of folks.
I'm sorry, Marvin Gaye and Smokey Robinson were coming just to have like cocktails before and after golf at your house.
They would go play golf and they'd stop in and maybe have a drink and then they'd be gone. So I would see Marvin, and then I saw Marvin once that he had been in seclusion for a period of time. I didn't see him, and a lot of the other people said that they hadn't seen him. So I was in a little grocery store right up the street from the University of Detroit on Leavenworth, and Marvin came in, and I spoke to him, and I asked him, "How you been, man? Where you been?" And he says, "I've been working, man." And he said, "I been working on an LP that's going to be the best thing that's ever been put on wax." So, "Oh, okay. So when's it coming out?" He said, "I don't know." I said, "Where is it?" And he says, "It's in my head." And I'm going like, "Oh, hell." What's Going On was the song that he was referring to.
Oh, God. Dad, what is your life?
I don't know.
Like, you just randomly run into Marvin Gaye and he's telling you about like this album he's working on, and it happens to be like.
Well, I asked him, how he was doing and what was happening with him, and that's what he told me. And he ordered what he ordered, and he got in his car and left, and I got in my car and left. I think he was driving a Rolls Royce or either a Bentley,
You
and I was driving the Volkswagen.
I remember at the same time we went down to Mississippi. For you, you're like, did we? I don't remember what year it was, but it was a very like monumental trip to me. I told you I wanted to go to Medgar Evers' house. We take a tour of the house, and then standing in the driveway afterward, you're just like, yeah, like I knew Medgar Evers. Like I used to stuff envelopes like at Jackson State.
Yeah, but he wasn't. I didn't know him. That he wasn't my buddy, but I knew him because my roommate would go over there and stuff envelopes and address envelopes and take the envelopes mail to the post office. And sometimes we'd go to the post office and get the mail because his office was right down the street from Jackson State at the Masonic office building. He was on the second floor. But every time we go in, he would always have something great to say. You know, and he always had something positive to say, that you need to do this, you need to save your money, you need to work, you need just a lot of great things. He was a great guy.
I know you guys weren't like besties or anything, but you realize most people don't have interactions at all from, I don't know, civil rights icons or like Marvin Gaye. That's kind of unique. Did you realize when you were moving from Mississippi to Detroit, and maybe I could ask the same thing about your siblings who moved up there, did you realize you were part of like a mass exodus or like a movement, a great migration? Or was that just like, I got to get the hell out of Mississippi because this ain't going to work no more?
I just knew when I came back from the service. And like I said, I stayed there about a month because my dad is really, really sick. And he told him he needed to go to the hospital. And he said he would go if I would go and stay with him. So I went to the hospital and I stayed with him 26 days. And up until the day of his death. And when I came back, I knew I was going to Detroit. I didn't go because everybody else was going to Detroit. Like I said, I went because of my sister. And then when I got there, with what my sister and her husband was involved with, he was a musician, and like she was the person, secretary treasurer of this black bank, and they were invited to everything. And my brother-in-law was playing music at most of the big functions. So I went to two things. I guess the first Saturday and Sunday that I was there, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday I was there, that most of the people in Detroit had never gone to. But I went because I was dealing with the right folks.
That's why I refer to you as like Black Forrest Gump, because you always seem to find your way into the mix and highlight of everything.
All of the things that I've been involved in, everything, I never really took myself too serious. I was serious about my jobs and all that stuff, but as far as me, the person, I never really took myself too serious.
Why not? I mean, other people take you seriously.
For me, I was just another person doing what I wanted to do and what I was supposed to do and having fun.
What do you regret? I think I know one of the answers. My thought was the radio. I think that you wish that you would have stuck with it.
Yep, but I was talking to a very good friend of mine who spent a lot of time in radio, and we talked about it. And he told me, he said, you did the right thing. He said, you did the right thing. You had the experience. You knew what you were doing. You had fun. You met a lot of folks. And it was time to move on. And what you did, it helped you get to where you were and where you are. Because the one thing about doing radio was it taught you to always, have something to say. You need to know what you were saying, but, you always, you just needed to be able to communicate.
Do you think it's weird that you had a kid who ends up, podcasting is not radio, but it's not really that far off. Like, do you think it's weird that I picked up your passions?
No, because you're always good on your feet. So it didn't surprise me. You could have done what I did when I got to Washington or whatever it was that I did. You could have done that. And you always say that I wanted you to go to law school. because I thought about going to law school, but my grades were so bad until I know school wasn't no school gonna take me.
I love how you stayed on my ass. I remember coming home with like a 3.75. I want to say like my freshman year of college. And both you and mommy, I think I had 4 A's and a B. So maybe it was a 3.8. And both you and mommy were like, where does B come from? Y'all acted like it was the worst thing in the world that I got not all A's. And then later in life to find out that you weren't the best student and had flunked out of college twice, maybe?
Yeah.
Why did you keep all of that from me?
Well, it's good that you know it now.
Oh, God. 1941 to 2025 is a massive arc of life. That's a huge leap in technology, in accessibility, in, I don't know, electricity. That's a lot. Do you ever think about the things that have changed in your lifetime?
Well, sometimes I think about my dad, because my dad died in 1966. And I wonder if he had one day in America now, what would he think? There's so much for me to try to process. Me trying to get on the internet to talk to you now was a problem for me because your mom helped me do it.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people ask, what do you think the number one invention? And I think that television was the number one invention because you could see a lot. You could see what people were doing. You could see what people were making. You could see what people were doing in New Orleans. You could see what people were doing in Detroit. And when you can see things, you can comprehend and you can learn a lot. I mean, the telephone, that was a great thing because when the first telephone that we had was like a party line and you had 8 telephones on the same line. So these 8 people had their own rings because like the ring for our house was 2 shorts, but the rings for my uncle and his wife was 1 long and 1 short. You pick up the telephone, the first thing you'd have to do is see if somebody else was on the telephone. And usually when people would pick up the telephone and they found somebody else on the telephone, they said, that's that old Lucas boy. Old Lucas boy, give us a chance to use our telephone, please.
Is there anything that I didn't ask you about that you want people to know who are listening?
I don't know, because I don't volunteer a lot of information. You have to ask.
You don't. You got me working over here, just FYI. Like, it's usually not this hard.
Well, that's what you're supposed to do. The one thing that I'm really, really happy about for you is that you've done which pretty much what you wanted to do. If you're waiting on something to do it with somebody else, or you're waiting on somebody else to do something, or to create something that they want to do, it's okay, but it's not as good as doing your thing.
God bless the child that has their own.
Yeah, because now some of the places that you've been, I go like, okay, let the child get back to where she's supposed to be.
You be praying for me, Daddy? You be praying for me when I'm out in the world?
Oh, girl, you don't know how I be praying for you.
Do you think you would go watch the movie?
Oh, I am going to go watch the movie. I tell you what, I'm going to watch the movie and then I'm going to tell you, we're going to have a discussion about what I think about the movie.
Okay.
Is that fair enough?
Yep, that works for me.
All right. It was nice doing business with you.
That's my dad. Thanks to everyone who listened to this special episode. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. I knew a lot of my dad's history, obviously, but like there's parts I didn't know. He filled in a lot of gaps. So it was great to put all those pieces together. I want to go over a couple things, just add a bit of context to a couple of things that he said. Emmett Till, his body was in fact sneaked, is the word that was used at the time, out of Mississippi. His mother, Mamie Till, paid a funeral director, white guy, 3,000 USD in 1955. That's about $32,500 in 2025 money. That was also the annual salary, I think, for white folks at that time. Willie McGee, he is the man who was lynched and my dad listened to it on the radio. It is not what we typically think of as a lynching. Now we would call it something like a state-sponsored lynching. Willie McGee was accused of sexually assaulting, raping a married white woman. Police picked him up and he confessed. He said, yes, I did it. And then later he recanted and said, no. When he recanted, he said not only did he not rape her, they did have sex and it was consensual. They were in a relationship and had been going on for some time. Given the time, that was probably considered almost equally as bad as rape. He was found guilty. Nevertheless, he was sentenced to the death penalty. It was a really big case and it was appealed for about 6 years, but his appeals ran out and he eventually had to face his punishment. Mississippi had a traveling electric chair. They announced on the radio this case that has been going on forever. It's finally coming to a conclusion and the accused is going to die today. From what I read, about 1,000 people showed up to the execution, tons of press to capture the sound. They were holding microphones over the electric chair so they could hear like the buzz, but also the death. I was reading this on NPR. The audio from that radio show was actually preserved. Somebody in media recorded it at the time and just kept it forever and a day. And then a museum opened up and he called and was like, hey, you might want this. I think it's, got some historical significance. On the NPR page, they actually have a link to play the audio of the execution. I cannot listen to it. I will not excerpt it and play it here because that's just too much for me, but it is available. Last but not least, Philadelphia, Mississippi. My dad talked about his sister working in a department store. He specifically said, Philadelphia, Mississippi, where the three boys during the civil rights movement. I wasn't sure exactly what he was alluding to. I had to go look it up. 1964, 3 civil rights movement activists were murdered by the Ku Klux Klan. Let me pull this up on PBS real quick. One of them was Black, James Earl Chaney. The other 2 are not. They said the men worked for the Congress of Racial Equality in nearby Meridian. I've been to Meridian. I'm scrolling down. It says, over the course of the summer of 1964, members of the Klan had burned 20 Black Mississippi churches. One of the churches was Mount Zion Baptist Church. The 3 men went to visit the charred remains of the church. They were leaving, headed to Meridian, and their station wagon was known to law enforcement as a core vehicle. The police stopped them. Chaney, that would be the Black guy, was arrested and charged with speeding, and the other 2 were held for investigation. Still reading, it says, despite the fact that the schedule of fines for speeding was posted on the wall, one of the officers said the 3 men would have to remain in jail until the justice of the peace arrived to process the fine. The officer, Price, he collected the speeding fine from Chaney without a justice of the peace, and he told the 3 men to get out of the county, and they were never seen alive again. They disappeared on June 21st. After 6 weeks of searching, the FBI got a tip from an informant, later identified as a Mississippi Highway Patrol officer. He told the investigators where the bodies were. The bodies were discovered on August 4th. All right, y'all. That's a lot. And that's the episode for today. I'm closely following the Shannon Sharp situation. There's a lot of back and forth. It's probably actually best that I don't cover it today so we don't have to spend multiple episodes going over it. We're at level 7 crazy right now. If it escalates beyond an 8.5, I'll drop another episode. It won't be our full length. It'll be enough for me to screech WTF a few times as necessary. Because Shannon, you 56 messing with a 20-year-old? Sir, I didn't really think he was better than this, but I'm disappointed nevertheless. Last but not least, shout out to my homie, Kieran Mayo. She is the editor of Miss Tina's new book, Matriarch. I cannot wait to get my hands on it. Also saw my friend Janine over at People. She also did a big, long interview cover story for People magazine about Miss Tina. I have not been able to get my hands on the book or the story. I'm in Cape Town and the See Some World trip starts tomorrow. So I'll get you what I can if I can, okay? Work with me, please. Okay, bye.